In January of 2024, SAO Last Recollection's DLC 1, Ritual of Bonds Part 1 has come and gone without much fanfare, being one of the most disappointing content drops ever in a SAO Online console game. But on the bright side, SAO Online Integral Factor rose above the high bar it set back in December 2023 this month. All the while, the developer updates for SAO Online Variant Showdown has sped up this time around. In this video, we're gonna have two separate updates from the developers. One is about changes to the processes they are doing to ensure a bug-free relaunch. The second one is a bit more divisive. It's about discontinued features come summer of 2024 when the game relaunches. Some of those changes are definitely to be applauded. Some of them, they're a bit more baffling and confusing. In fact, a majority of this video is going to be about SAO Online Variant Showdown with sweeping changes all around, so I hope you are ready for it. Welcome SAO survivors to Dead Game Report for January 2024, featuring SAO Online Integral Factor, Last Recollection, and Variant Showdown. And this video is brought to you by my channel merch on Teespring. Link to my Teespring store is going to be down below in the description. We have Lens Squad t-shirts, Angry Medina hoodies because she's always angry. We have the first day project stuff, t-shirts, hoodies, even a poster for that one. And the only reason why that poster is not here is because, as you can see, I have no place. I will actually need to think about that when I move eventually at some point. We'll see. Either way, go ahead and check the link in the description to see if there's anything you like. But for the Dead Game Report this time, I'm starting with Last Recollection because I just want to get that over with. Back on January 25th, the first DLC for the game, Ritual of Bonds Part 1, got released to barely any promotional activity, and its contents, which were basically 9 bed scenes sandwiched between 2 lengthy and uninspired, dialogue-filled, half an hour worth of chores. If you're interested in a rant of disappointment, my review for the DLC is up on the channel, but otherwise, the DLC also received barely any fanfare. At least based on Steam player counts that are available, which was never all that high to begin with for Last Recollection, on January 25 with the DLC release, the concurrent player count rose up to just above 100, which is already nothing more than a fraction of the release numbers, which were already lower than the previous games, and within 2 weeks, these numbers have already settled back to their usual spot. So much so, in fact, that if you look at all the SAO games on Steam, Last Recollection, the most recent game, finds itself in the 4th place behind Integral Factor, topping the rankings, followed by Fatal Bullet and Alicization, Lycoris, despite the DLC boosting the numbers of the most recent Last Recollection. From the looks of it, without the DLC, it would have easily dropped below Hollow Realization 2. I'll be honest, I don't like kicking a game when it's already down, especially a game that I consider to have the best ever main campaign across the entire SAO gameverse, which does not include Integral Factor, that one is special. But the DLC was such a letdown that I'm ranking many free DLCs from the previous games above this one. It's truly baffling. That's it from Last Recollection. Let's move on to our most important subject for these monthly videos, SAO Online Integral Factor. Last month, when talking about December numbers, I mentioned how the popularity and the revenue of Integral Factor had reached to a similar level to that of the previous year. In January, SAO Integral Factor pushed even further ahead with another 3 million yen in the bank and surpassed the December 2022 mark, even though January continued to be a relatively empty month. The only real content drop was Diavel's return story in the underground dungeon, which was hidden behind multiple hard side quests that most casual players likely did not even bother with, and it was not quite advertised as a main story either, where the game actively guides you towards it, making it feel like a story that solely exists to teach people the underground dungeon and its drops. And the story itself was relatively underwhelming as well, and pretty much hoped you did not pay much attention to certain details. I have an entire Twitter thread about it. I noticed because I pay attention. But overall, January was mostly carried by cool and beautiful looking banners. Aside from the reruns or grabbacks, we had the New Year's Feast on the New Year, which carried the momentum nicely side by side with the grabbacks and reruns. Troubling Letter Order on the 11th, which lost momentum relatively quickly. the Viking order on the 17th, which was a bit more successful. As mentioned, the new DLL story arrived on the 24th alongside a special DLL banner, for which the hype was not really there, and it also coincided with the Last Recollection DLC release on the 25th, and even though Last Recollection popularity was low, we can see it affecting Integral Factor here for 2 to 3 days until it normalizes again, at least in Japan, drowning out the new story and the DLL banner. The 28th saw the Black Attire Order, which its incredible visuals immediately brought people back to the levels at the beginning of the month with the New Year stuff, so that was quite impressive of a bump, but it did not quite carry over to the beginning of February, but that's the topic of the next video anyways, we're not going into February in this one. Also, do let me know if mapping out releases like this helps better understand the month in general. I feel like it's a good visualization at least, to give you an idea about what's affecting the popularity and how. But yeah, despite the weak story that was pushed quite to the sidelines, January 2024 was a relatively big success. The only result that is higher was the January of last year, although I would expect a sharp drop for February. Historically, for the past 2 years, January can be seen taking advantage of both the New Year and the game anniversary hype quite successfully, the wind of which starts slowing down considerably in February when looking at that past data. So the goal of Integral Factor for the upcoming video is to result in as small of a decline as possible. We'll see what happens when that happens. On the PC side of things via Steam, I'd say Integral Factor fared quite well on PC, maintaining the wins, an 11% drop overall. However, the game still reached a respectable peak compared to December. December was just more consistently high with the Christmas and New Year's back-to-back having events, and to be frank, January was not a month I felt invested in Integral Factor with so little going on in the game, so I'll definitely see the slight drop as a win for Integral Factor in this case. February so far has not been that lucky, but again, that's the topic of the next video, and we'll have to wait and see for the story release towards the end of the month anyways. That tends to have the power to push towards a better overall month if successful, since the latter half of months are generally trending lower otherwise, so the story drop tends to make or break this period. Anyways, as I enter page 3 of this script, let's have a look at the Variant Showdown dev updates, which are gonna take long. I thought I'd only cover a single update as usual, talking about their approach to bugs and errors, but a couple days ago, we received a second update talking about features that they would be removing from the game. Now, as always, I did share my opinion on Twitter when they were released, which is why you should absolutely follow me there at Gamerturk95, but we'll go a bit deeper here in this video. So first off, they addressed the bugs situation, which was a good idea since the original release was ridden by a massive lack of optimization and polish. And also touched upon operability, the smoothness of the game all around, whether in gameplay or in menu navigation. Now, the developer update on bugs was light in its nature, a little bit of a vague thing, but it really could not have been any different when addressing us, the players. These are all extremely technical matters that, if put transparently, 99% of us won't be able to understand the real causes and the spaghetti code and all that kind of stuff, but it is important from a trust perspective that they acknowledged all of it and outlined steps in general terms. Now, on the bug side, they're basically shaking up all kinds of development and debugging processes to be better at catching bugs before release and to be more agile when responding to the bugs that make it into the live game. But based on their wording, you can also sense how much they are actually overhauling the game during this period. They mention it in passing since they are focusing on what matters to the player base in the first place, but the fact that they are not, and I quote, they are not fixing existing bugs one by one, but rather debugging deeply during development, that there are no bugs at the end of the production pipeline that they are going through. That's more or less an indication of them rebuilding most of the game, and as they rebuild, they are squashing the bugs that are created at that point. They are not looking at what was in the previous portions of the game. Now, let's just hope that the pipeline is solid enough that we may relaunch in summer 2024 with a reasonably smooth game. Such releases don't get the benefit of a relaunch often. Pokemon Masters EX is one of those rare ones that succeeded, although I still think the Pokemon Masters sex hashtag was playing a part in that. So it's important to stick the landing at the time of launch, no more rushing for release like they did initially to take advantage of Unleash Blading's death. I still can't believe Nintendo somehow greenlit that tag. How did they not see it coming? I have no idea. On the operability side of things, they had partially talked about changes to the gameplay side of things in an earlier developer update a couple months ago, the first update in fact, if I remember correctly. So basically, that was adjustments to gameplay speed and fluidity, changes to the camera, button placement. They now added modifying parts of the cutscenes to that list, but I'm not sure what that could be really. Maybe they're just changing up the lengthy battle opening cut-in animation before the stage cutscene starts playing to speed things up, you know? I don't really have a clue on that one. What's new and important in this one is what they're addressing outside of the gameplay this time around. They are changing the way the data processing is handled to reduce lag, which immediately brings the character list loading or item icons loading or stage list loading, etc. that comes to my mind, all leading to significant lag in what needed to be a simple and smooth menu experience. The character roster was painfully slow to load for the first time after launching a game every single time. That was especially a huge gripe for me, so here's to hoping they are addressing all of those. They're also modifying parts of the screen design, which I imagine is a restructuring of menus to simplify things as well as to reduce the number of taps required to reach key elements of the game, which is generally appreciated, especially for online games that tend to check in with the game server every single time you tap something. So less taps means less need for server checks, which means less load times as perceived by the player. Our screenshot is actually the new home screen, but I'll talk about that in a second. Screen transitions are getting a bump in speed, which I don't recall particularly being an annoyance for me. The overall sluggishness of the menu was always my main concern, but improving the speed of server transmissions, that's what I was referring to with server checks, which again is very much appreciated when every single tap for some reason has to connect to the server. And last but not least, improved matching speed, which I guess relates to the Battle Royale feature. I still think the main concern about Battle Royale is the netcode and how they cannot make real-time online gameplay satisfying in a mobile setting. You know, when it's a mobile game with people playing on shoddy mobile connections. So getting match made faster is not particularly going to improve my experience on that front, you know? And sadly, the bad experience is not a fault of the developers either in this case, it's just the reality of mobile gaming. If some guy is connecting to the game from a continent different than I am and is using a 3G connection or the McDonald's Wi-Fi that's available, no matter how great your netcode is, which let's be real, it wasn't great from what we saw, I'm not having a good experience in that game, no matter what you do. Now, before we move on to the next update with the deprecated features, let's have a look at that home screen, shall we? For starters, the UI feels a lot more slick in nature, which is great in my opinion. The old UI, it always felt everything was so large, yet the home screen itself, it felt empty. We get a more traditional UI in this case with smaller icons. We have the usual mission tab, shop tab, team tab, gacha, quests, menu icon, and from the looks of it, my wishes have been, at the very least, partially fulfilled. We have a button down below to, at the very least, collapse the menu tray down below so we can enjoy the home screen animations properly without the advertisement banners blocking the characters. So, thank you! And a double thank you if the button does not only collapse the bottom bar, but rather disables the entire UI for a clean screen. Now that would be incredible. The restructuring of the main screen has left a huge screen real estate as well, which appears to be used to display the full character illustration, which does look neat, I guess. I like it. I never really understood what the white space was supposed to be back in the original release, and having it be a 3D environment, it probably was more taxing on the menu than it needed to be anyways. In addition, we can now see the Friends tab, something the original game was planned to have eventually but never came to fruition in time. It appears it is finally becoming a reality where you'll be able to add your friends, but of course, the game had no co-op, and so far we have heard nothing about it, so how far this Friends feature will extend currently remains to be seen. But knowing how much of a request it was, I do expect to hear about it in one of the future developer updates. And you know what? Maybe it has something to do with the blurred away menu item down below on the right side. That looks like a guild shield if you ask me, so it may be a guild feature finally arriving in the game. Alternatively, it maybe could be Aincrad or something similar, which reminds me of the popular floor clearing feature of the previous SAO games. In Memory Defrag it was Aincrad Assault, whereas in Unleashed Blading it was the Cathedral Assault. It was always one of my favorite features, at least back in Memory Defrag. The Unleashed Blading version felt a bit too power scaled towards the absolute newest unit, so I always did them up until 2-3 assaults prior to the latest release to have a chill time. But either way, floor assault events were always an enjoyable and rewarding experience, so you know, that would be a good alternative. Just brainstorming and spitballing here as to what it could be. But of course, if we're getting friends and or a guild feature, I would expect a co-op feature to be there finally. And to be frank, for mobile games, I would definitely rank co-op over PvP in any scenario. Shoddy connection can absolutely ruin PvP scenarios in the most frustrating ways, but the nature of co-op, you know, PvE enemies with players going against an NPC enemy, allows the desync to be mitigated without harm to each and every player's gameplay experience, and would absolutely be a welcome addition. But moving on to the next developer update, which unlike the previous ones that came out towards the end of a month, this one came out early February, just a couple days ago. This one was about the discontinuation of 3 specific features. When the game returns in summer 2024, there will no longer be a skip feature. There will also not be character images upgrading upon a rank up, and support for multiple languages will no longer be there. And I hope you're ready, because we're heading into some deep business related topics here, which is not necessarily gonna be a talk for those who just want to play a game without facing the realities of how games exploit them. Now, before everyone is up in arms about these, I'll start quite boldly in fact. The removal of the skip ticket feature is a great decision. The rise of the idle game culture is the bane of gaming, and honestly, a mark of shame for the developers. These people work hard to create the games people want to enjoy, but then create a feature to, not play the game? Most players don't understand drowning in meaningless dopamine rush of random and meaningless rewards by arbitrary numbers going up, but skip tickets, they are a paid solution to an artificially created grinding problem. So much so that publishers like Ubisoft tried for years to change the perception in such speed up mechanics, as they call it, as if they were some graceful gods, whereas the reality is vastly different. Such features solely exist because excessive grind is implemented in every single game. Skip tickets don't exist for you to achieve faster progress. Skip tickets, or different kinds of speed boosters, they exist because the games are being made excessively grind, knowing a lot of people will gladly pay to not play the game. Because you know, realistically, the base logic, if the criticism is this grind requirement is stupid high, the solution is not, here's a paid item to speed it up by not playing the game we created. The solution is rebalancing the grind requirements to not be stupidly high, rather than frustrating the players into coercing towards a purchase to not play the game at all. Of course, the developers, they cannot say that. You cannot find that part of the reality outside of scientific papers or business conferences where they actually admit these things. But what the SAO Variant Showdown developers state it is also quite true. Since the design mentality of features like skip tickets, they are backwards implemented, they also snowball out of control in unintended ways all the time. And in the case of Variant Showdown, it turned into an endless loop that caused further increase to the event grind requirements, which in turn needed an increase of skip ticket supply because it was too unreasonable, and basically that looped back and forth that led to an unhealthy and an ever-growing problem in the skip ticket economy balancing. So, I applaud the bold decision of removing skip tickets from the game. However, that applause, it comes with two preconditions. One, as I mentioned, skip tickets and excessive grind, it is a slimy business tactic, so my expectation is that with skip tickets getting retired, I'm hoping the grind will be balanced accordingly to not be excessive, but rather a reasonable goal to reach without causing frustration for the players. And secondly, which is kinda surprising, it's not a standard or a requirement for the industry nowadays, that is mobile games, but that second requirement is that the game itself has to be fun to play, because obviously it is not fun to play an unfun game. But on this topic, I will continue to put my trust in Takeuchi-P. Integral factor in his leadership has become a mobile game that is still healthily continuing after almost 6 years now. And while Variant Showdown had plenty of shortcomings on release, I believe in Takeuchi-P and his team to turn things around for a player-friendly game that does not try to exploit its player base. That kind of goodwill and respect towards the player was already existent in Variant Showdown on release, with the game not featuring competitive ranking events that always require the latest units and for you to purchase them because otherwise you can't get them and the like, you know, to be successful. And that kind of mentality, that was part of the cause of Memory Defrag and Unleash Blading's eventual demise, so I'm hoping that reasonable approach in Variant Showdown will continue the same way it has been going on for 6 years in Integral Factor. But on that topic, they are also planning an auto battle feature as a compromise during this shift, which I am not the biggest fan of since it's just yet another idle mechanic, but I also respect the compromise aspect of it, especially since an auto battle, it usually allows you to intervene mid-battle and take control. So for example, for multi-stage battles, you can just let the game do the mundane part and then take control yourself, where the gameplay is actually getting more engaging with more challenging enemies and the like. And obviously, since auto battles still function in real time, they theoretically should not skew the grind in unreasonable ways. I will be looking very carefully at that when the game releases again. Now, second deprecated feature is the illustration glow up, or more commonly known as the image upgrade on a rank up feature, a staple of pretty much all gacha games, so I'm baffled by this decision quite a bit. Now, before you freak out, the full illustration is not going away. They are making the reasonable decision of making the full illustration into the default image, and they're planning to utilize the pre-rank up illustrations in some other way, in some other feature, but still, them citing people don't upgrade for the illustration but to make their characters more powerful, it is weird. I mean, in all games, people upgrade units to get them to their maximum power. That is not a secret, but that does not change the fact that the illustration upgrade is an exciting moment that always feels very much satisfactory in games. There's a reason why Fate Grand Order has like 3 or 4 image upgrades sometimes, with the last one being an original full illustration. You know, there's definitely a science going on there to make people feel happy. Granted, I will yield, it is not a make or break decision. It is a feature that only slightly improves experience and only once per character in the entire lifetime of the game. But I also enjoyed having additional character illustrations, and I don't even see this as a cost-cutting measure either, since they are planning to utilize pre-glow-up versions elsewhere, although they do not clarify whether they're just talking about the already existing ones or new ones they will create. But either way, nor do I think it adds up so much in terms of costs to have the onboard artists draw 4 or 5 additional character illustrations per month, especially since they are non-background illustrations we're talking about. And you know, character designs already have to be made regardless for the full illustrations as well as the 3D models, so that doesn't even factor in on that aspect. You know, just give me a minimal budget and I'll gladly commission incredibly talented fan artists who love this series themselves. I'm semi-joking, of course, but you know, I'd love to support the community of fans and pros in such a way. Tomato Riz, Tutora, Genkei, Ashley, Sefu, Huo, Kizu, Itsmao, Y, Kiritian, Star King 0102, Taruman. Okay, Taruman maybe only for summer bikini units for reasons. Countless talented artists that I would not be able to list one by one. Even just those I follow for reference closely, all with their unique style, and sure, maybe that's just me being overly sentimental for the community and it doesn't sound as professional, but that is also something I did for my own channel projects, and it was always my goal to contribute to the community however I could in the first place. Or, you know, it wouldn't be the hardest thing ever to approach official SAO artists who worked on the series before. You know, we got Mugetsu, Kanetsuki Masato, Kimi, Beko Riko, Nekobyo Neko, Puyocha. I mean, that is what Fate Grand Order does sometimes, but at this point I'm just doing an artist showcase, so I'll wrap it up here. I really don't see a reason to remove the illustration glow up feature, and on a separate note, a lot of the community deserve participation or opportunities like these. Unleash Blading having that character design contest with a beautiful tease illustration, for example, or Integral Factor's stamp design contest were both lovely community events that deserve to be made more often, and it honestly should not be too much of a burden for game projects like these. You know, not like the game would be running in negatives like I do when I did my story of the past videos and commissioning artists when I fully knew the video would never be popular enough to recoup the money I spent. Go watch my Hopeful Chant Cordial Chords and the first day videos there. All incredible Sword Online stories that will likely never be adapted in anime form, and I put a lot of effort into those videos. I hope you enjoy them. Anyways, moving on, the last discontinuation is support for a lot of languages. Basically, all foreign languages outside of English and traditional Chinese are being removed from the game when the game returns in summer 2024. On one hand, I understand the business decision. You know, if other languages only constitute a very small fraction of the player base, then yeah, sure, as I understand. But while they say they analyze data, I fear how much the data was actually representative when, aside from the first week of the game's release, the game had significantly underperformed the entire time, leading to a quite small sample size to make big decisions on that front. I am, however, particularly surprised they did not even have trust in the French fans, who are statistically the largest consumer of Japanese anime and manga related media outside of Japan, so much so that companies like Kadokawa, the publisher of Sword Online print media, among a myriad of other renowned series, are investing heavily and directly into French market recently. And my experience with the official Variant Showdown Discord server, if there's one thing that constantly repeated itself outside of the usual bug complaints, it's the French people coming into the server insisting on speaking French rather than English and constantly requesting an official French server or at least a French channel that we sadly always had to refuse due to lack of moderation capabilities in French, you know. I could do an additional German and then Turkish moderation and would love to practice basic Japanese, but the baguette language sadly is not one of my proficiencies or interests. Anyways, while the removal of languages is disappointing and not committing to the very popular French audience in-game is surprising, you know, given the recent trends, it is at the very least an honest decision compared to the alternative. More and more, rather than hiring actual translators, Japan is utilizing machine translation and then hiring translators at a lower rate to simply check if the machine translation is serviceable. When that low bar is slowly starting to become the industry standard, both at the detriment of actual translators as well as the resulting quality that is being served to the players, I can at least take some solace in the fact that they are just outright axing the languages rather than butchering them in-game. Either way, the next update is planned for the month of March, so it seems like only this feature removal dev update was pushed forward earlier than usual. If we get the next one in early March, I may be able to feature it again in the Dead Game Report video, but if it's late March, the next video will likely have no section for Variant Showdown at all. But that's it from Dead Game Report featuring SAO games in January 2024. Look forward to the DGR for stats and information on all Sword Art Online games next month, and make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to not miss it. Until next time, stay cool.